Broadcasting live on the UnitedWest.org AM radio network, simulcasting on DirecTV, iHeartRadio, Roku, and the World Wide Web. This is Enemies of the State with Tom Trento.
Yeah, right now the Jets are thundering in our opening, at least, and we all hope, as we're just about 8 days away from a decision on the negotiations with the P5+1. We're going to tell you what that means. Today's show, we're going to deal with the Iranian issue all week. It's so critical, we hope 8 days from today. It's a real deal with real teeth, real meat, real ways to suppress a regime that we all have serious questions about, and that the Jets don't go thundering into combat in some way, but that this could work out. We hope that. Is that a possibility? Yeah, anything's possible in this world, maybe except the Miami Dolphins winning the Super Bowl again. That may not be one of the possibilities, but here in Florida, at 7 minutes after 4 o'clock, 7 minutes after the hour, East Coast time right now, on the 22nd of June, Monday. Tom Trento, your host, WSBR Radio, broadcasting on commercial radio out of Boca Raton from Miami up to North Palm Beach. RedStateTalkRadio.com for you midnight guys. We're on Studio B. I was told, Damon, to say Studio B because they got Studio A and Studio B. Studio B for the night owls, midnight East Coast time. And of course, our show, our television element of the show is on theunitedwest.org, teapartycommunity.com. And it's up for 1 day on the United West, the day we broadcast, 4 o'clock to 4 o'clock. Then it's archived on our YouTube channel with all the rest of the stuff. But big week today. Our special guest is Dr. Matthew Kroenig at Georgetown up in the Washington, D.C. area. We're going to lay the groundwork, sort of an overview, a template for the issues that have to be considered and resolved. And a little later in the show, we're bringing Clare Lopez, Vice President of Research and Analysis from Center for Security Policy. So pretty serious show today, in fact, all week. We will have on Thursday, we're sticking with Extortion 17, the expose on the United States government's cover-up of the shoot-down of Extortion 17. We'll have two of the Gold Star fathers with us, Billy Vaughn, who lost his son, Aaron Vaughn, SEAL Team 6, and we'll have Charlie Strange, who lost his son, Michael Strange, SEAL Team 6 cryptologist. And, as you know, we've been into that very, very deeply. And SEAL Team 6 in May of 2011 finally got, after many years of looking for him, got Osama bin Laden. Got a lot of other guys before and after that, but Extortion 17 could have been payback from the Taliban just 90 days later. Regardless, we're on this because as we move into very, very deleterious and dangerous days in the Middle East, now with Iran rising as a potential regional actor, a regional significant player, supplanting, at least for this administration, the Sunni side of the ledger. And we know that Iran is sponsoring terrorism worldwide. We have all of the facts. We know SEAL Team 6 and the Delta Boys and others of the elite special operators for the United States are going to be utilized more and more, which is why we're dealing with the issue of Iran this week and the issue of Extortion 17 so that we can preserve their lives as much as possible. But Damon, can you tell us a little bit about our special guest today, Dr. Matthew Kroenig, and then we'll bring him on after you kind of tell the folks who he is. He's been on our show before, but let's reintroduce him.
Absolutely. Dr. Matthew Kroenig is an associate professor and international relations field chair in the Department of Government and School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University and a senior fellow in the Brent Scowcroft Center on International Security at the Atlantic Council. He is an expert on U.S. national security policy and strategy, international relations theory, nuclear deterrence, arms control, nuclear nonproliferation, NATO, Russia, Iran, and counterterrorism. He was a foreign policy advisor on the 2012 Mitt Romney for President campaign and is a member of the John Hay Initiative. From May 2010 to May 2011, he served as a special advisor in the Office of the Secretary of Defense on a Council on Foreign Relations International Affairs Fellowship, where he worked on defense policy and strategy for Iran. In 2005, he worked as a strategist in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, where he authored the first ever U.S. government strategy for deterring terrorist networks. For his work, he was awarded the Office of the Secretary of Defense's Award for Outstanding Achievement. Dr. Kroenig regularly consults with the defense, energy, and intelligence communities. He has also held fellowships from the Council on Foreign Relations, Harvard University, the National Science Foundation, Stanford University, and the University of California. He is a life member on the Council on Foreign Relations.
All right, so what we have here, folks, and we don't normally spend 20 minutes laying out somebody's vita, but we think it's so important that you understand Dr. Kroenig's background and that he can't be pigeonholed as a right-wing or a left-wing guy. He's got his feet in kind of both camps through his academic and professional national security camp. And in terms of our work, particularly on this issue, he is one of the clearest voices that we have heard. Thus, at the outset of this very important week, we've entitled Apocalyptic Iran, Good Deal or Bad Deal, ? We wanted to get Dr. Kroenig back. Dr. Kroenig, welcome from sunny, breezy, warm Florida. I'm sure you're in a hot, sticky Georgetown today, right?
Yeah, well, thanks very much for having me on, and it is muggy in Washington today. It would be nice to be a couple miles from the coast, and sorry to bother or bore you and your listeners with that long resume there. But.
Well, we're putting this stuff on the record. We have a lot of opinion leaders worldwide, a lot of bad guys worldwide that listen or watch our show. So we want them to understand that you've committed yourself to quite a bit of very serious professional national security work on the issue. We're going to show you a video that the Clarion Project did in a short video in a couple of moments entitled Con Job. But give us at this point a minute or two, kind of an update as to where we are. And our objective, our big idea for today's show, is to get a handle on where we are in the negotiations, whether or not what looks like is going to come out of there is a good deal or bad deal, but more importantly, what the implications of a good deal or bad deal are to us here in America, to those in the West, and to Israel.
Yeah. Well, my judgment is that the deal that's currently being negotiated will be a bad deal. And that's because for 70 years or so, the United States has opposed the spread of enrichment and reprocessing technology to any country, including our own allies. We've tried to prevent from getting this technology. It's technology to make fuel, nuclear fuel that can be used for a nuclear reactor or for a nuclear weapon. Because of the dual-use nature, we've always tried to prevent its spread. So for 10 years or so with Iran, ever since Iran started enriching uranium, our policy has been zero enrichment in Iran, that the only good deal would be a deal that eliminates enrichment. And over the past 18 months or so, we've started negotiating over the scope of that enrichment program. We've said that Iran can keep an enrichment program, and the question is how large an enrichment program. So I know many people's eyes glaze over when they get into details about centrifuges and levels of enrichment. And the reason it's so complicated is because it's a bad deal. If it were a good deal that eliminated enrichment, it would be very clear. So where the two sides are now is that, as you pointed out, there's a June 30th deadline that they're trying to reach. On our side, we want to get limits on Iran's enrichment program, also limits on other parts of the nuclear program. And in exchange, we're prepared to provide sanctions relief. But we also want inspections. We want to be able to go to these nuclear facilities and make sure that Iran's doing what it says it's going to do. And so there are a few sticking points still, and one of the big sticking points is inspections. So the two sides are going to try to work these out over the next couple of weeks. I think it's unlikely that we get a deal by the actual June 30th deadline, But I think it is likely that we will reach a deal sometime in July. I think we'll blow through the deadline, but probably end up getting this deal.
And the deal that you're saying we will reach in July, again, theoretically, is good or bad?
Yeah, my judgment is it's a bad deal. I think solving this diplomatically would be by far the best outcome. But a good deal would be one that eliminates Iran's ability to make nuclear fuel.
So
and Iran has, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So the June 30th date, when you pushed it back another month to July, you think there's going to be a delay of some sort, and the bad deal is still going to result in a bad deal. Iran's not going to cave on some of these key points.
Yeah, well, I think these deadlines are more important for the United States and the West than they are for Iran. And so what Iran's done to us in the past is played our deadlines against us, waiting till the last minute, hoping that we're going to make big concessions. And so I think they'll probably employ that strategy this time as well. And so they're going to hold out until June 30th. And then I think after the deadline passes, then they might start to negotiate a little more seriously. So my best guess is that we will get this deal shortly after the June 30th deadline. But again, my judgment is this won't be a good deal. There's no talk of going to zero enrichment. And I can obviously talk more about other aspects of this.
Yeah, it sounds to me, Dr. Kroenig, that the Iranians, and look, these are Persians. For 3,000 years they've been negotiating all over their part of the world, and it looks like they're conning, cueing our guys over here, looks like they're conning the United States, actually the P5+1. We'll tell you what the P5+1 is in a moment, folks, but our good friends over at the Clarion Project that do some phenomenal documentaries, they put together 5 short videos on the Iranian situation right now. We'd like to show our viewers and have our listeners listen to the soundtrack here and have your comments, Dr. Kroenig, after you watch this little video about the Iranians conning the United States.
He seems to want a nuclear bomb. This is the leader of America. He doesn't think that's such a good idea. So to figure it all out, they tried to make a deal. Welcome to a short instructional video, how to con America and get a nuclear bomb. Okay, so let's say you're Iran and you need to run a con on America. Where do you start? Well, the first step in any good con is to earn the trust of your mark. And you can't establish trust when this guy is the president.
Ahmadinejad is saying he will strike
You'll
Iran.
need a bit of a makeover to get the process started. So make sure that this guy gets elected.
Moderate cleric Hassan Rouhani is Iran's new president.
He is known as a reformist.
But is Rouhani really a reformist?
About 470 people have been executed in Iran since he took power.
And who's the guy behind the curtain that's really pulling all the strings? The supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei.
ملت‌های مسلمان در همه نقاط عالم مرگ بر آمریکا میگن.
Step number 2. Don't be afraid to lie. Tell the world your nuclear program is for peaceful purposes.
Our program is exclusively peaceful, has always been and will always remain exclusively peaceful.
Iran is pursuing peaceful objectives.
Keep repeating your story, and the world will conveniently ignore the fact that the head of the UN Atomic Agency has strong evidence that Iran's nuclear program is not for peaceful purposes.
Iran has carried out activities relevant to the development of nuclear explosive device. It is my duty to alert the world.
The next step is the good old bait and switch. Make them believe you're agreeing to reasonable concessions, and then don't. Here's a good example. In the interim agreement reached in April 2015, Iran said they would allow inspections of all their nuclear sites.
We do not intend to cheat.
That led President Obama to assure the world that
international inspectors will have unprecedented access, not only to Iranian nuclear facilities, but to the entire supply chain that supports Iran's nuclear program.
Now that they've taken the bait, make the switch.
Tehran has repeatedly stressed that it will not allow inspections of its military facilities.
گفتیم که اجازه نمیدیم از هیچ یک از مراکز نظامی هیچ بازرسی از سوی بیگانگان صورت بگیرد.
Step 4 is to identify their weakness and exploit it. America believes that diplomacy is the ideal way to solve all major problems.
Diplomacy ends wars, saves lives, spreads freedom all around the world.
And therein lies their weakness, because America mistakenly believes that Iran shares their values and that they also want peace.
ما از جنگ با آمریکایی‌ها استقبال می‌کنیم.
آمریکایی‌ها با انقلاب اسلامی دشمنن، با جمهوری اسلامی دشمنن.
Now, because America believes in the goodwill of all people, they'll do almost anything to keep you at the negotiating table. So stay tough, and you'll find that they'll even be willing to move their own non-negotiable terms, their so-called red lines. Originally, America said that Iran must close the Iraq and Fordow nuclear facilities. They said that Iran should stop all nuclear enrichment, and they insisted that Iran should have only 1,500 centrifuges. But because you were tough, Iraq and Fordow will not be closed.
None of those measures include closing any of our facilities.
Because you were tough, you can now continue enriching uranium.
We will continue enriching.
And because you were tough, you get to keep more than 6,000 active centrifuges.
So there will be no destruction of centrifuges?
No, not at all.
And if they try to act tough,
if Iran violates the deal, sanctions can be snapped back into place.
You just show them who's boss.
If people are worried about snapback, they should be worried about U.S. violating its obligation and us snapping back. And that is a point that the United States should be seriously concerned about.
Congratulations! With these 4 easy steps, you have successfully conned the United States of America. So, despite your double talk, appalling human rights record, worldwide sponsorship of terror, and your genocidal calls for the destruction of America and Israel, you are now well on your way to getting a nuclear bomb.
Dr. Kroenig. Was there anything wrong with that little 5-minute analysis of how many years have we been negotiating with the Iranians on this issue?
Yeah, since 2002 is when the enrichment facility came to light. So we've been dealing with this for 13 years. And yeah, as you pointed out in the introduction, I'm a professor, so my tone's usually a little bit more somber than the video, but it's basically on target. I mean, one, I think Rouhani, his strategy and goals are no different than Ahmadinejad. He just has a more diplomatic style, different ideas about the tactics to achieve those same goals. So not much of a change there. Yeah, Iran's claim that it's a peaceful program. There's every reason to believe that it's a nuclear weapons program. And as you pointed out, I recently published a book called A Time to Attack, The Looming Iranian Nuclear Threat. In there, I go through and point out about 8 different things that Iran's doing that makes absolutely no sense if they're interested in an energy program, only makes sense if they're interested in weapons. The third point on the inspections is, it's a difficult one because Iran has said that they'll allow us access to their nuclear facilities, but not to their military bases. And so at some level, that's understandable. We have arms control agreements with the Russians, but we don't allow them to go to all of our military bases. There are certain things that are off limit. The problem is that Iran has done nuclear work at its military bases before and could do that again. So if we don't have access to those military bases, we can't really verify this deal. And so that's going to be a major sticking point. And then final point, it's true that Iran has stuck to its red lines and we've gone off a number of ours. So the reason we started this far apart and we're here now because we've come to Iran's position, not because they've come to ours.
This boggles my mind. We have all these sanctions for all these years. We've gotten a sufficient number of countries, and not just Western countries, but other countries that join in this sanction phase, which put economic restraint and limited some of the economic vitality of Iran. And they came to the table. Why is it just bad I mean, Trump was announced for the presidency the other day, and they don't know how to negotiate in the White House. Is it just bad negotiations? Or, as some have thought, President Obama seems to be shifting allegiances in terms of regional control in the Middle East from the Sunni side with the Saudis to possibly the Shia side with the Iranians, and part of that transition requires stepping back from the so-called red lines that we held against the Iranians. Is there another element to this geopolitical chess game?
Yeah. Well, before getting to the why, if I could, I would just like to underscore how puzzling this outcome is, because the United States and its allies is really holding all of the cards. We're the superpower. We're the country that put in place probably the most devastating international sanctions regime ever. It really was crushing the Iranian economy. We've got 6 UN Security Council resolutions against Iran, so we have international law on our side. And if all else fails, we do have an effective military option. So Iran's nuclear facilities can be dust tomorrow morning if that's what we want. Iran, on the other hand, doesn't have any leverage whatsoever. Its economy is being crushed. Its program is being held at risk. It's under international sanction, UN Security Council resolutions, and yet they're the ones getting the better deal. It's really remarkable. But I think a lot of it is that the U.S. is bad at negotiating. We've signaled that we want a diplomatic outcome, and so the Iranians know that that's our preferred outcome and that they can stick to their red lines and get a good deal. In terms of reorienting in the Middle East, I think the administration thinks that if that were to happen, that if an Iranian nuclear deal leads to a more cooperative Iran, that would be a positive development. But I don't think that's their goal, honestly. I think their goal is to get a deal to solve the nuclear program, not some broader rapprochement. But if it would lead to Iran to be more cooperative internationally, they would welcome that.
All right, well, as a fail-safe device to these negotiations, the United States Congress, particularly now Republican-controlled House and Senate, jumped into the fray recently, and Senator Corker put together the Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act of 2015, S615. And I'm looking at a one-page, the one-pager you've probably seen 100 times. The key provisions. Now, what I'd like to do right now, 28 minutes after the hour, 28 minutes after 4 o'clock, Tom Trento, your host, our special guest, Dr. Matthew Kroenig from Georgetown, an expert on Iranian nuclear life and facts. What I'd like to do is to now put into this complex picture the positioning of the United States Congress as a fail-safe device to a bad deal, and analyze, Dr. Kroenig, whether or not the political structure coming out of the U.S. Congress through S615 can do what it's intended to do. And I'm going to show you or read for our audience the key provisions of Senate Bill 615, approved by the House and signed into law by the President. So this is a real bill that's supposed to check any sort of bad negotiation that the administration does. The bill requires the President to submit to Congress the agreement and all related documents, including specifics on verification and compliance. This ensures Congress will see the entire deal and make an independent judgment on its merits. In the real world, Dr. Kroenig, will the administration hand everything over, just fait accompli, to the U.S. Congress?
Well, I think the biggest problem with this is that if it goes to Congress, even if Congress votes overwhelmingly against this, the president has a veto. And then so Congress would need to override that veto with a 2/3 majority. And so I think it's, given the number of Democrats in the Senate, I think it's very unlikely that Congress would be able to override that veto. So I understand what Congress was trying to do here, but I think in the end, the effect is going to be that Congress gets its say and the administration gets its deal, which isn't a great outcome in my view. I think what walking back from this deal is going to require is a new president in 2016 who's willing to do that. and all of the leading Republican candidates have said they're opposed to this deal. Governor Scott Walker of Wisconsin, among others, have said that they would tear up the deal when they came into office. So I think that's one of the things I'm working on now, is what would a strategy to kind of improve this deal or to walk away from this deal look like.
Yeah, this is very important, ladies and gentlemen. We're 30 minutes after the hour. Dr. Matthew Kroenig from Georgetown. And the United States Congress, and this boggled our minds, Dr. Kroenig, when this deal was put, when this piece of legislation was put together, and he's got very specific stuff. Here's one of the key provisions, number 2. The bill prohibits, everybody listen to this, the president from waiving statutory sanctions while Congress reviews the agreement. If the agreement, and this is the typical legislative language, if the agreement and all related documents are submitted prior to July 10, Congress has up to 52 days to review the deal and vote on the agreement in the first 30 days. The president has 12 days to veto, followed by 10 days for Congress to override a veto. If the deal is submitted in the lead up to the August recess, July 10 to September 7, Congress has an additional 30 days of review for a total of 82 days. And it goes on and on and on to lay out what seems to be a very specific timeline that Congress has to act. And if the president vetoes it, as Dr. Kroenig just said, then the veto can be overridden by the Senate, who seem to have enough people to override the veto. Didn't the legislators understand this going in, or did they just punt to a later day, hoping that they'd persuade some people to come over from their side, to leave their party affiliation and come over to the Republican side? This is what it seems to be breaking down to.
Yeah. Well, for a long time there was a question about whether Congress would get a say at all. And so it became just legislative executive jockeying for influence. And so I think just getting the say at all is something that many congressmen thought and senators thought was a step forward. And I think there is some symbolic value to having a majority of the Senate voting against it, even if it's overridden in the end. I mean, it sends a powerful message that the representatives of the American people think this is a bad deal. But the short answer is there's nothing Congress can do to stop this deal if the administration wants to negotiate it.
All right, let's take that as a sad geopolitical fact. Let's now look at the timeline of making a bomb and saying, "Oh, sorry guys, we didn't quite know the guys on the other side of our house over here in Iran actually were putting this thing together. Sorry, we violated everything that happened." But we got it now, and that's just the fact of the situation here. We're going to have about a year to the election from the time that all of this maneuvering at the United States Congress takes place. The president gets his bad deal. You talk about, there was discussion about snapbacks, and I can't conceive how you can snap back sanctions that have been released and relieved, to snap them back at all these countries that are now putting pressure on to automatically say, oh, wait, we just put a $20 billion deal together with Iran. We're going to back off of that. I mean, this is ridiculous. But how quickly will Iran be able to move, if they want to, from, say, November 2015 until there's a new president, if there's going to be a new president who agrees with this, 2016?
Well, there are a number of steps Iran would have to take to build nuclear weapons, but the first one, and the most important one, is enriching enough uranium for the first bomb, enriching enough uranium to 90%. And that's really the real red line for us. Once they do that, the game is over. So the other steps don't really matter as much. That's what we need to focus on. Right now, the best estimates are if the Supreme Leader dashed to a nuclear weapons capability, it would take him roughly 2 to 3 months to produce one bomb's worth of highly enriched weapons-grade uranium. With this deal in place, assuming that Iran abides by the deal, and it hasn't done everything it said it would do in the interim deal, by the way, but assuming this deal is in place, then the administration claims that we would move that timeline from 2 to 3 months to about 12 months. Outside experts have looked at this, though, and their estimate is more like 8 months. So essentially what this deal would be doing is buying us 5 months or so. But again, that all assumes that we get the deal and Iran abides by it, which is something we can't necessarily take for granted.
why in the world would Iran abide by a deal that they've been able to out-negotiate with the P5+1? By the way, what does P stand for, and who are the 5+1?
Yeah, so it's the permanent 5 members of the United Nations Security Council. So that's where the P5 comes from. So that's the United States, Russia, China, Britain, and France. And the +1 is Germany, which is a country that's played a lead role in these negotiations going back to 2003. So it's major outside powers and Iran negotiating to get this. To your question about why would Iran abide by it, I mean, Iran has a couple of different strategies going forward, and I think Iran's ultimate goal is to have its cake and eat it too. It's to get sanctions relief, but it's also to keep its nuclear weapons capability and eventually build nuclear weapons. And I think what Rouhani and the current government have decided is that they need to get the sanctions relief first. And so they're negotiating to get the sanctions relief, but they want to keep as much of their nuclear program in place as possible so they can return to that path. So there are 2 ways they can do it. If they're really patient, they can wait for this deal to expire, because this deal has a sunset clause. Even if we get this deal, it's only to remain in place for 10 years. So they could be patient, wait 10 years, and then all their restrictions are lifted and they can do what they would like to do. If they're not that patient, then the strategy would be to cut this deal, get the sanctions relief, and then start cheating on the deal and dare the international community to do something about it. So it's hard to say which strategy they would choose, but they have gone back on almost all of their agreements historically, so I wouldn't be surprised at all if they cut this deal and then start cheating on it shortly thereafter.
Well, and oh, here's Clare Lopez. Hello, Clare.
Hey there, Tom.
How you doing? Clare, you and Dr. Kroenig have communicated, but I don't think you've ever met. Now, nice to have you on the show, Clare. Say hello to Dr. Kroenig.
Thank you, and hello. Glad to be with you on the show together.
Yes, hello. It's good to finally see you kind of in person. We've exchanged some emails, but it's good to see you.
Yeah.
All right, Clare, we've been discussing, obviously, some of the basics to this as we're going to deal with this all week, to the Iranian situation. And right now we've been discussing whether or not the Iranians may cheat, but you got to weigh in on evaluating their mindset, which we do a lot of around here. I believe, Clare, that President Obama already has said, or maybe it was John Kerry, Secretary of State, that there's no real military solution available to the West, to the United States. Was something like that said somewhere recently?
Yeah, you heard right, or perhaps read it. And I believe it was Secretary of State John Kerry who made that statement. And of course, it's puzzling as to why he would say such a thing. It's completely inaccurate, of course. Yes, of course, there's a military solution. It's called striking the Iranian nuclear weapons facilities. And the way I would frame this is that the P5+1 negotiations and preceded before that by the EU3 and so forth that go back a number of years, all these negotiations have been about Iran's overt program, the one that got outed by the National Council of Resistance of Iran, largest Iranian opposition group, back in August of 2002. That's what they're talking about. Facilities that have already been revealed, like Natanz and Isfahan and Arak. But the legitimization of that overt program through the negotiations, which is what it looks like we're headed to do, is not taking into account that there's a parallel covert program. It always has been. There's never been a time since the 1980s when Iran began its nuclear weapons program that it did not have a covert element to the program. And so even as we, watch and wait and see the negotiations timetable pushed back and extended over and over again, that is merely buying time and moving towards the legitimization of Iran's overt program. We have no idea how far along they are with the covert program, and that's the problem.
Dr. Kroenig, you've spent a good portion. You've spent a good portion of your professional career peeking into Iran and all they do. What is your understanding of some of their possible covert tricks up their sleeve?
Yeah. Well, a few comments. One, I completely agree with Claire that we have a military option. We can destroy Iran's nuclear facilities. This would set the program back at least several years, but possibly longer. It's in the administration's interest to argue that we have a military option and talk about how effective it is. It enhances our leverage at the bargaining table. And moreover, it's true. So it's really puzzling as to why they would undercut their own leverage by taking the military option off the table, in essence. Claire's also right that Iran has had secret programs in the past. Their current overt program used to be a secret program, and then we caught them and brought it to light. And so I suspect that Iran also has activities that we don't know about. This is something that maybe Claire and I could argue a little bit about offline. I'm somewhat skeptical that they have a large covert program producing highly enriched uranium that we don't know about. But reasonable people can disagree about that. But if they do have a large covert program, then we're really in trouble because none of the options, military options, diplomatic options, are going to be helpful because if we don't know where these facilities are, we can't negotiate to shut them down, and we can't shut them down in a military strike either.
Yeah, one of the questions on the table revolves around Mohammed Javad Zarif, the phenomenal, eloquent English-speaking negotiator who, ironically, he and I were in Denver at the same time. I was in one school, he was at the University of Denver doing work there. What are your thoughts, both of you, on this gentleman here, Javad Zarif, and he's got a very close relationship with John Kerry now. I mean, what goes on, Claire and Dr. Kroenig, behind the scenes when these negotiators spend years and years together, having, maybe not in Zarif's case, having wine, but socializing and all that? How does it help the negotiating process or hurt it?
Well, to jump in here, Tom, I would first of all hesitate to call any official representative of the regime in Tehran a gentleman. What Javad Zarif, the foreign minister now, formerly UN ambassador from Iran, previous to that, what he's doing is promoting the regime's agenda to acquire a deliverable nuclear weapon. He is engaged in duplicity. He's engaged in very sophisticated games. And behind the scenes, we don't exactly know what is going on, but I'll tell you what we do know, that members of what we've called at the Center for Security Policy, the Iran lobby, meaning in particular representatives of a group called the National Iranian American Council, or NIAC, and their founder leader, Trita Parsi, have been all over the venues in Vienna, Geneva, Lausanne, where the negotiations are taking place. And just to carry that one step further, a former employee of the NIAC organization, which is widely been described as a influence operation for the regime in Tehran, a former employee of NIAC is now the desk officer for Iran at the National Security Council. Okay, this is how influence operations are conducted, successfully, obviously not by us, by them.
Yeah, Dr. Kroenig, back in May, when Congress weighed in on this and said, we're gonna have a say in this, NIAC, National Iranian American Council, put out a little short statement and basically said, hey, don't mess with this. Everything's going great. If the U.S. Congress and, the right-wingers and all that jump in, you're going to screw this up, and it's going to be worse after all. What has been your experience with the NIAC folks and Trita Parsi and that whole crew?
Yeah. Well, America has a democratic system, and that's, I think, one of the great things about the country. And so the nature of our system is that it is open to outside groups and to lobbying efforts. And so I think there's a place for that. But at all times, we have to understand the purpose of these groups. So NIAC's purpose is explicitly to improve relations between the United States and Iran. And so you have to take their statements with that knowledge at hand. Their goal isn't what's in the best interest of the United States or for U.S. national security. It's to improve U.S.-Iranian relations. So, I think they can have their say, but when it comes to deciding what U.S. policy toward Iran, the people you need to go to are people who don't have an interest in this, other than doing what's best for the country and protecting America's national security.
Yeah, Dr. Kroenig, in your book, A Time to Attack, you have a very dispassionate, analytical approach to the problem, and then you project some scenarios as resolutions to preventing, to the issue of preventing Iran to get a nuclear weapon. And you argue very effectively that stopping them militarily is going to create a mess, a geopolitical global mess, but allowing them to have nuclear capability is going to be even worse. Take a moment or two and construct, and maybe you've updated one of your military scenarios in terms of stopping Iran for 2-3 years, whatever it may be.
Yeah. Well, the what is worse question is a difficult one. If diplomacy fails, and we're left with the choice of living with a nuclear-armed Iran and the threats that would pose for decades to come, or taking military action. Neither one of those are attractive, obviously, but the question is what is worse. In my judgment, having worked on this for a year at the Pentagon and thought about it a lot since, and I think the bipartisan consensus in Washington, at least in terms of rhetoric, is that all options are on the table, and that we need to be doing whatever it takes, including using military action if necessary, to stop Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. So you can question whether he believes it or not, but this is what President Obama has said as well. So there's really no one arguing that we should give up and live with a nuclear-armed Iran. Everyone, essentially, at least publicly, agrees that the military option needs to be on the table. If it came to that, there would obviously be a range of options. There could be more limited strikes just on the nuclear facilities. One of the downsides of that is it leaves Iran's ability to retaliate in place. So you could also imagine broader force packages that would also go after other military sites as well to blunt Iran's ability to retaliate after a strike. And in terms of the timeline, let me just say one thing on that. So these timelines of 3 years, 5 years, these are worst-case assessments. These are assuming Iran is bombed on Friday, decides to rebuild on Saturday, and doesn't encounter any significant difficulties. But in the real world, stuff happens. If you assume domestic political problems, international problems, Iran decides to wait to rebuild, maybe doesn't decide to rebuild at all, then that delay becomes much longer and potentially is forever. That would obviously be the hope, that it delays Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons in a politically time.
All right, hey Claire, the pink elephant in the room, switching the metaphor, the 800-pound gorilla in the room that everyone is aware is in the center, but we kind of dance around it a little bit here and there, is the country of Israel, and whether or not they will weigh in on this in one way, shape, or form. If using your best analysis, you're the head of research and analysis at Center for Security Policy, spent 20 years with the agency doing this stuff. How would you analyze right now Israel's understanding of the situation and what their possible options are if it's a bad deal? As in the early part of the show, the professor said he thinks it's going to be a bad deal sometime late summer.
Well, obviously, Israel and its leadership, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, have spoken often and certainly before the U.S. Congress about threat that Iran, and especially a nuclear-armed Iran, poses to Israel. The daily calls for death to Israel, the statements by senior leadership figures like the Basij commander, who just a week or two ago said that the annihilation of Israel is non-negotiable. The Israeli leadership takes that seriously. We should, because Iran is no less an existential threat to the United States with its ICBMs that the Pentagon says can have the range to reach continental United States this year, 2015, from Iran. It's demonstrated progress in R&D that the IAEA has talked about, its warhead development, its joint venture in ballistic missiles and other technology with North Korea. It's a very real threat, existential, if you think about an electromagnetic pulse weapon, one of which destroys America. So it's a threat to us too, but our leadership isn't taking that seriously. And I would suggest that our leadership's plan or agenda for the Persian Gulf actually is to allow Iran to go nuclear and to use its nuclear power to cement its geostrategic hegemony over the region. I think that's the agenda. For Israel, which is a lot more clear-sighted and serious about assessing the threat from Iran at the moment, they're faced with a very, immediate decision. They are not being backed by the Obama administration. They've got no confidence that we would support them if they did mount a strike against Iran. But on the other hand, many of its Sunni neighbors, the Saudis included, are just about as concerned about Iranian nuclear weapons capability as well as its geostrategic aggression in the region as Israel is. And so Israel has to make a decision.
We're getting
how
feedback here.
close is Iran to delivering a weapon, and then decide from its own national security perspective what it needs to do.
All right, we're getting a little feedback on your feed in. I know you had some questions, Claire, for Dr. Kroenig, and I'm going to let you ask whatever you want in a second. But recently, 2 months now, our team was in Israel, and we spent a couple of days with one of the generals that oversaw the strike at Osirik in Baghdad, 1981, Operation Opera, and spent some time with other generals. And something we took out of their experience in the past and their capabilities in the future, that whenever they are presented with an impossible physical task or something beyond the capability of an airplane or whatever the issue is, their answer, the Israelis, has always been, we sit down and we figure out how to make it happen. And time after time after time. So when we confronted them with, would you strike Iran if the United States gets a bad deal? They say, look, this is not our problem alone. It's a world problem, and the world should be involved in this. We will do what we have to do, but you don't have you need big bombs. We will figure out what we have to do when we need to figure it out. They're very elusive that way, but you got to believe they're planning something, and the world's going to look it's going to be a very dangerous place either way. Bad deal, Israel has to strike, or Iran gets the bomb. There's no good way out of this as I see it. But did you have any questions? We're coming down to the end of the show for Dr. Kroenig, Claire.
Sure. Well, I guess maybe one thing I would ask is, I read your book, which I thought was really well-reasoned all the way through. Have you had any thoughts since finishing the book and publishing the book in your thinking about the Israeli situation and its likelihood and its likelihood of taking a decision to attack and likelihood of succeeding in at least setting back Iran's nuclear weapons program for a time, a year or two, or whatever it might be?
Yeah, well, thanks for the kind words about the book. And it is something I think about. As you know, U.S. capability for taking military action against Iran's nuclear facilities is much greater than Israel's, and I think the Israelis understand that. So they would very much prefer that we deal with this issue for them. That said, I don't think Israel is going to stand by and watch Iran build nuclear weapons. So I think that Israel would prefer not to take military action in the short term. One, because I think its capabilities to destroy, especially the facility at Fordo, aren't that great. But in addition, it's going to be hard to take military action while there's ongoing diplomacy or if there's a deal that's being celebrated as successful. But if Iran dashes to a nuclear weapons capability, and it's clear that the United States isn't going to do anything, I think Israel will go ahead and take action. And in terms of what they can accomplish, Tom talked about the 1981 Osirak strike. I was also talking to one of the pilots on that strike, and he said that when they were getting ready, they were told that there was a good chance that they wouldn't come back alive. And they said, well, at least we're going to be accomplishing something great, right? And they were told, you'll probably buy a few months delay in Iraq's program. And they say, here we are 34 years later, and Iraq still doesn't have nuclear weapons. So a lot of times, taking military action against a nuclear program like this can buy you much more than you expected going in.
Hey, guys, we were in the office of the commander of that operation, General David Avery. He's now the head of Boeing in Israel. And he took down off the wall and showed us, there he is right there, he showed us a satellite photograph of the reactor before and after. And it was signed by Vice President Cheney. And this was in 2003. And he said, General Avery, I thank you for doing what you did, because what we just did in Iraq would not have been possible if you didn't do what you did in 1981. It was a very interesting little piece of history that's going to be part of the story that we're going to tell about it. But crazy days, guys. We've got a couple of minutes left. Claire, let me give you a moment or two to share at the beginning of this very important week, and I know both of you are deeply involved in this issue, a message you may have for Americans or for freedom-loving people worldwide. Claire, you go first.
Well, I would just say that as our Secretary of State Kerry and his team continue to negotiate with the Iranians, whether or not they reach a deal by the end of June, which is only a couple of weeks away now, or if the negotiations continue on after that, Americans need to realize that our leadership is negotiating away red line after red line, points and capabilities that should have been denied to Iran forevermore. And if I could encourage Americans to do one thing, it would be to contact your representatives in Congress and tell them, dump this deal. Whenever it comes before Congress for a vote, they need to dump the deal. They need to insist on a number of things. No enrichment for Iran. A look and the ability to monitor Iran's ballistic missile program. The ability to look into any site, anywhere, anytime, military sites included, because that's where the covert program is. No release of sanctions. No release of frozen funds until Iran verifiably complies with all of the UN Security Council resolutions, including the ones that say no enrichment, a halt to construction of the parallel heavy water reactor plant, plutonium route to Obama, Iraq, and an opening of all the sites to clear up all the questions called possible military dimensions by the IAEA. Those are just some of the most important points. A release of the 4 American hostages held by Iran right now.
Good idea.
An end to genocidal threats against the state of Israel. Without these things, please tell Congress, dump the deal.
All right, thank you, Claire. Good words. Professor?
Well, I see public opinion polls that show that a majority of Americans support the negotiations and the framework deal, and that surprises me. I think it shows that the administration has done a good job of making its case. And so all I would say is the deal that's being negotiated is literally unprecedented. The United States has bargained with rogue states over illegal nuclear programs in the past, like Libya and North Korea. But in those cases, our terms were clear and uncompromising. No enrichment. This is literally the first case in history where the United States is bargaining over the size and scope, not the existence of an enrichment program in a rogue state. And so I think that if your listeners find and viewers find the negotiations confusing, it's actually pretty simple. Until the United States returns to insisting on zero enrichment, these negotiations deserve zero support.
All right, Dr. Kroenig, once again, thank you. We all really, America appreciates the hard work you've put into this. We will touch base with you as this thing develops. Claire, as always, You're a wonderful, dear friend, great work, good wonderful American. Folks, that's the end of our show. Tomorrow, Peter Pry. We have Dr. Peter Pry to discuss Iran's EMP capabilities also. Everybody, see you tomorrow. Have a wonderful and safe day.
Bye, Tom. Thank you.
Bye-bye, guys.